Hold on. What? There was an Olympics this year? No. No, that can't be right. Holy crap, there was! Oh my god. God, this year has been so long. Like, last year seemed pretty long, but I think this year has probably been one of the longest I've ever experienced in my nearly 27 years of life. Is this just what happens when you get older, or is this what happens when the world begins to slowly unravel around you? Hey everyone, my name is Jacob, but the trolls, they call me Snowflake. Happy holidays, everyone! Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Blessed Kwanzaa, Bitchin', Unicorn Dance Party, whatever holidays you celebrate, may they all be merry and filled with joy. Hey, I'm recording this before Christmas Eve here, give me a break. So, a lot happened this year to the world. A little bit good, I think I can say. Definitely not a banner year for humanity, I think. We had some victories, though. Milo Yiannopoulos is completely and hopelessly bankrupt. Who says Antifa and deplatforming doesn't work? Flip the US House of Representatives and put another roadblock in Trump's way. Almost with the Senate, too. And nearly got a Democratic governor in Texas. Texas! Only about half of all Americans got the fuck out and voted, but hey, highest turnout for a midterm ever, and imagine what could happen if more people turned out and if voter suppression wasn't such a huge problem in the US. And a black gay furry just won Esports Player of the Year and pissed off pretty much the entire gamer community. So that's something at least, right? But we also had some pretty big blows this year. US Supreme Court is basically conservative for the next generation, and outright fascist was elected in Brazil with the promise to deforest the Amazon, to kill gay and black people, and turn Brazil into a police state. And of course we got the news that basically we've got 10 years left to stop climate change or else our world is screwed. I'll get to that point in particular in a little bit. But, it's funny that as the world has one of its worst years in recent memory, I think I've actually had one of my best years ever, believe it or not. I mean, maybe not as much came of it as I would have liked. The channel is still growing. I still haven't found an agent or a publisher. I still haven't found a boyfriend/personal fuck slave. But I think I made some pretty big leaps out of my comfort zone and actually managed to really grow positively as a person this year. Is this maybe a sign that my luck is finally turning around? I seriously doubt it. I've always had rotten luck, but I can hope, can't I? Seriously though, before this year, I was just kind of feeling powerless and just depressed and hopeless. Like, I grew up being told that you make it through high school, you go to university, you get your degree, just any degree. It doesn't even matter what in particular, just a degree, and you'll get a job no problem, we promise. Only to find out that that was basically a massive lie to get tens of thousands of dollars out of me, because basically the minute I go and try to find a job, I'm met with, well, actually, you should have gotten a master's or a PhD. Actually, why the hell did you even go to university in the first place? Did you really think that that degree was going to get you anywhere? Actually, you should have learned coding in elementary school like all the kids are now. Actually, you should have gone into the trades or college. Actually, you should have been working since you were 14 like everyone else. Actually, you should just go and work at McDonald's just like everyone else in your generation. Hey, eventually, maybe, you'll make store manager. I tried for years to find a job that didn't make me miserable and hate my life, but apparently that's just too much to ask for in this day and age. For 2 to 3 years, I tried to be a good little cog in the capitalist machine, just trying to find a retail job that would give me an income, and while I tried to finish my book and find an agent. But after sending resumes to everyone from Chapters Indigo, which was my dream retail job, to a vape shop, all I ever got was 3 interviews in years of searching. Because guess what? When everyone, their mother and their grandmother is looking for a job, and every single one of them has more experience than you, finding a job can be pretty hard. Probably being autistic, which has about an 80% unemployment rate, doesn't help much, of course. On top of that, there's the fact that basically spending high school just trying to recover your personhood and self-esteem after 10 years of Catholic school, which you still have nightmares about, and then going into university for 5 years and basically being forced into a state of perpetual emotional and nervous breakdown all over again, doesn't exactly leave you a lot of time to even consider getting a job during that. Like, looking back over this last year, I realized that I've basically kind of spent the last 10 years of my life at least just trying not to have a breakdown and just trying to keep my own mental health intact. And I had never really even been into YouTube all that much before university, but I got into them as a way to distract myself and alleviate some of the stress of university, and afterwards to pass the time as I sent out resumes and surfed the internet. For these last few years, I got more and more into YouTube videos, following and watching more and more YouTubers, and as my joblessness stretched on, I kind of started to think that maybe I could do this too, or at least give it a shot. I had toyed with the idea of reviewing things a few years ago, but it was late last year, probably around this time, that I seriously started to consider it. I just thought, why not? I've got no other prospects and no agent is picking up my book right now, so why not give it a shot? And the moment I really decided to give it a shot was about 1 year ago when I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts called Queer and Pleasant Strangers by two of my favorite people ever on the internet, Laura Kate Dale of Kotaku UK and Jane Aerith Magnet of Stoned Monkey Radio. I submitted a joke to the podcast that made them laugh and smile, which of course made me super happy and made my day. So seeing that I could make people laugh, I figured, hey, maybe I can make it on YouTube too, and if I didn't, at least it would give me something to do. And so that's exactly what I did. I bought a mic, I learned basic audio editing on Audacity, and I started my podcast, 8 months ago now? This is the 16th episode, so at least 8 months now. And yeah, sure, I'm not getting as much money as I would have liked, but let me tell you, it feels fantastic to not be searching for a job and being constantly turned down and being hounded about it by my parents and made to feel like I'm just terrible and spoiled and lazy for not having found anything yet. And it's also been really great having an outlet for my thoughts and feelings and perspectives on things other than just, shouting at my computer screen or ranting to my family about it. I'm sure they're very grateful for that too. Before this channel, I was having so many depressive episodes, just feeling worthless and hopeless, and like nothing I do is ever good enough. And while those definitely haven't gone away just yet, as I'm still, of course, not in the place I'd like to be at this point in my life, I think that I'm genuinely in a way better place emotionally from where I was last year, and I am so grateful for that. Actually, I think it's a lot like Jane once said on Queer and Pleasant Strangers. As a person with mental health issues, you spend so much of your time just trying to make it through the day or the week that you eventually sort of wake up and realize that you've made it to an age that you honestly thought you'd never reach and just think, shit, I did not plan for any of this. This year was kind of like that. It was the year I finally decided that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of just sitting around and waiting for the world to let me have what it promised it would give me and instead decide to try and make it myself. Though we still have yet to see if it all really works out, but I can honestly say that this is probably one of my better decisions. And sticking to the topic of better decisions I've made, there was a seriously positive life change I made a few months ago that has really been a wonderful change of pace and has really made me so much happier overall. You see, for as long as I've been alive, my parents have always dragged me to church every single Sunday. Once I hit my teenage years, they said that it was my choice, but it never really was. I was always guilt-tripped into going, with them saying, oh, you're just gonna sit at home anyway, what else are you going to do with your day? The church is so small, we need all the people we can get now. Oh, your job as the PowerPoint operator is so important, and that sort of thing. But as I got older, I really came to hate going to church and really resent it. And having to be around people who I know would never accept me if they knew just how gay I really was and am. And I had sworn for years that I would find a way to get out of it, but I never did because I still had all that guilt in my head every time I thought about putting my foot down. But finally, in September, I had grown completely fed up with it, and after doing this podcast for 6 months already, my mental health had improved enough to gain the courage to speak up, and I haven't been back to church since. I've taken that time to go for long walks around my city, try out some of the city's restaurants, hang out at the mall, and catch up on some shopping. I got my Christmas shopping done in September, which was great, and I would go down to Lake Ontario when the weather was warm. While my legs haven't stopped being sore in months, and I swear that I have gained like 10 pounds in muscles in my legs as a result of this. It's something else which has really contributed positively to my overall mental health. I never knew just how relaxed you get just standing there and listening to waves crash onto the shore, and how it just seems to drown out all the concerns and worries you have going on in your mind. Really, I think I'm experiencing the best mental health right now that I've had in like 5 years at least, if not since high school. And while I'm not in a perfect place and I still have my bad days, I feel like I'm really finally starting to come out of my shell and find my self-confidence again. Maybe for the first time in my entire life. Like, I've spent so much of my life just being so afraid and anxious and hopeless and aimless and just trying to survive that this is kind of the first year where I've really felt like I'm living, like I'm actually enjoying life. I felt for so long like I didn't even feel human. I felt like I was half of a person, and I finally feel like I'm actually human again. It's amazing what a little bit of self-care can do, huh? And I really feel so stupid that it's taken me until age 26 to finally start getting my shit together and actually beginning to come into my own. But hey, I'll take it, I guess. I managed a couple other big things too. I finished the first draft of my second book this year. Still haven't found an agent for the first one, but at least I'm making progress, you know? I also went to London, England this year, my first trip outside the country since high school, and I even managed to meet Laura Kate Dale in the flesh too, completely by coincidence. I once had a professor in university tell me that she thought that I was working to try to reconstruct my identity. And you know what? Yeah, I think that's true. I think I've been trying to reconstruct my sense of self after a lifetime of being belittled and put down and of feeling worthless and not even human, that this is maybe the first year that I'm actually beginning to finally feel like an actual human being. And that's a pretty great feeling. So, really, I guess what I just want to say to all my lovely listeners is, well, thank you for being along with me on this journey. Thank you for listening to my ramblings. Thank you for tolerating me as I improved and learned the ropes of this and went through some pretty terrible early episodes. Thank you for allowing me this platform to share my thoughts on the world and allow me to say what I've wanted to say. I know the channel is still small at the time of recording, but knowing that there's still a group of people out there who are actually interested in what I have to say is something I haven't really had much of in my life. And it's really helped me realize that maybe I actually do have some important things to say, and maybe I actually have some great ideas that could actually really help people. Maybe my ideas actually have value. Maybe I actually have value. So again, thanks. Hopefully, we'll be able to continue this ride together for many months to come, and hopefully, you'll one day be able to say that you've been listening to me since the very beginning and that you always knew I'd make it big one day. They say that the past is a different country, and I sure as hell never realized just how true that statement could be until this year. Really, even the last few months have felt like night and day, and I am so happy to be able to say that. It feels so good to not be sad and depressed and hopeless and resentful all the time for once in my life. However, this year of improved mental health and all my time on YouTube and in online left-wing spheres has also afforded me the ability to reflect and look at events going on around us, which has really caused me to grow politically and ideologically as well. This year has really seen me develop my own theories around what needs to be done to make the world a better, less capitalist place, and I've most definitely been given a lot of stuff to mull over this year, both internationally and locally too. For those who don't know Canadian and Ontario politics, we have a very centrist Prime Minister right now. And earlier this year, about 30% of Ontario voted for a Conservative Premier because first past the post is just great, isn't it? And like between the two of them, I feel like I am watching the rot and decay of capitalism happening right in front of my eyes. Our Premier, Doug Ford, brother of Rob Ford, yes, that Rob Ford, is slashing red tape left and right, getting rid of every single office, position, and regulation that he doesn't think is necessary under conservative ideology. He got rid of the universal basic income pilot on like his first day after he promised he wouldn't during his campaign. He cut Toronto City Council in half because he's got a massive grudge against the city, threatening to even go around the Ontario judiciary to do it. And he recently proposed a bill which will let big business bypass environmental and safety regulations, including the Clean Water Act, which was put in place after 6 people died and over 2,000 were made ill by the largest E. coli outbreak in Ontario's history in the town of Walkerton, Ontario. And also basically means that companies would be allowed to pollute drinking water and face no consequences for it, as well as allowing corporations to exploit and build within Ontario's Greenbelt, which is an area in southern Ontario of protected forests, watersheds, wetlands, and farmlands. He's even overturned things like workplace safety laws, laws that stopped employers from demanding female employees wear makeup and heels, and even got rid of a childcare safety bill that mandated a set number of children per daycare worker after a string of child deaths in daycares. Oh, also cutting a $25 million fund for disabled and low-income students. Strangely, however, for someone who's declared Ontario open for business, he's only allowing about 28 pot shops in the entire province. Open for big business, more like. Like, can you believe it? The guy who is cutting and deregulating left and right, claiming he's trying to get spending under control, but when presented with a brand new industry projected to make the government billions of dollars and create thousands of jobs, he goes, no, 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 we need to clamp down and regulate the shit out of this. Thankfully, though, rather than making everyone happy, Doug Ford now has approval rankings that are even lower than Donald Trump's. The deficit has been growing massively since the minute he stepped into office, and Moody's just downgraded Ontario's credit rating as a result. Turns out giving massive tax breaks to the wealthy, installing your friends in positions of power, and cutting red tape that was literally made out of the blood of people who died as a result of not having it, not only does not make anyone safer or happier, but it also costs you massive amounts in lost revenue, and strangely, massive corporations just aren't handing out money or jobs yet. Weird, isn't it? On the federal level, we have a centrist in power who I'm honestly not ashamed to say I voted for because he said all the right things at the time, and the other options, Jesus Christ, where do I even start? But he has now shown himself to be a capitalist to a fault, him promising to put Canada's environment first, and then in the same breath saying the importance of putting pipelines over Indigenous land to pump tar out of the tar sands to Canada's coast so that we can sell it overseas to China. He said that there wasn't enough money to put fresh drinkable water on First Nations reserves, but then turned around almost the same day and announced that they were going to be spending $4 to $5 billion to buy one of those pipelines from a multinational fossil fuel corporation, and still believes that he has the right to lecture the rest of the world on the importance of stopping climate change, while having his financial minister announce a tax break to the largest and wealthiest corporations in Canada of about $14 billion. And then having his environmental critics saying that, oh no, what we're just going to do is we're just going to have everyone in Canada go buy electric cars, and then we'll be able to meet our Paris emissions goals, no problem. Oh, please, for the love of God, let the NDP win the next election, please. The goddamn centrists are never going to let it happen because, oh, the NDP will spend Canada into oblivion. Well, the Conservatives will cut us into oblivion, so which do you prefer? Spending to have a nice coffin or slowly starving yourself to death? And of course, Canadian capitalism still being capitalism, this shit has become rather common in the business world too. The Alberta oil patch reportedly made about $17.5 billion last year, but has still been cutting thousands of jobs, while also receiving billions in subsidies and billions more in contracts and deals, all while crying poverty and whining about not being allowed to completely destroy the earth in the name of profit. I swear to God, I saw an article about the government giving the oil and gas industry like $68 billion over 5 years, but I cannot find it for the life of me, so don't quote me on that. There's a Canadian aerospace corporation called Bombardier, which last year I think got like $500 million to keep the lights on and avoid massive layoffs. But guess what? The company then turned around and gave all of their chief executives hundreds of thousands of dollars in bonuses. And when the Canadian public went, what the fucking hell? They tried to justify it by saying, well, we need to attract executives to our company. Yes, executive jobs. Those were the jobs that the Canadian government was trying to save. And just like last month, Bombardier announced that they were going to lay off hundreds of workers anyway. And then there's the Canadian auto industry, which has been receiving billions of dollars in government stimulus ever since the financial crisis of '08 and the near collapse of the entire industry. Ontario alone giving the auto sector about $2.8 billion a year. One of the biggest recipients of this government stimulus, to the tune of millions of dollars, being General Motors, a company which started in Canada and announced last month that they were going to be closing car assembly plants, including the one in the town I am currently living, Oshawa. If you don't know Oshawa, it's basically Canada's Detroit. It's a city that is fundamental to the story of automobiles in Canada, but is also kind of a complete shithole, especially when I was growing up. And the plant here is actually the largest car parts plant in the entire world, one of GM's most decorated and awarded plant, and one of their most profitable. And its closure means that 2,000 to 3,000 workers will be out of work, and up to 15,000 will be affected, which is about a tenth of the entire city's population at this point. Oh, and did I mention that GM was founded in Oshawa, and that we still maintain Parkwood Estate, the massive mansion and grounds of one of GM's late founders, John McLaughlin? And what does GM say to justify the closure of this plant? Oh, they're shifting production towards autonomous and electric vehicles. Hopefully no one listening to this needs me to tell them just how bullshit that excuse is. Everyone knows they did it to please the shareholders, that's it. Oh, and our Premier of the People, our Open for Business Premier, basically shrugged and said, well, them's the breaks, in response to calls that he should intervene. Like, it's become so painfully obvious to me that these corporations and industries are basically taking government money, taxpayer money, our money, and running away with it. And that the only people who they're working to please are their shareholders. But I think that there's more to it than that. Both the Premier of Ontario and the Prime Minister of Canada are turning to big corporations and giving them billions and billions of dollars in the hopes that those corporations will take that money and invest it into expanding their company, putting in new operations, making more jobs, moving jobs from overseas back to Canada. But the problem with that line of thinking is that we are in an era where corporations aren't interested in making jobs because that means more labor costs. All corporations care about now is getting as much money as humanly possible. We've entered into an age where corporations are only interested in pleasing their shareholders and executives, where they'll take billions in government money which was given to them so that they'll create jobs and basically use those billions as revenue for their company, and then just turn around and cut jobs anyway. And they'll do it because they know that the governments of the world aren't going to do anything to punish them for it, because not only do these governments still believe that giving money to corporations is the way you make jobs, but also because if these corporations don't continue to make massive amounts of money, then they're going to downsize to make that money back, which will cause even more job losses, which will only look bad on the government who is supporting them. And of course, because these governments are so in bed with these corporations in the first place. I mean, where the hell else are they going to go when they retire? The economy in our world is no longer serving the people, and the government is no longer serving the people. It's serving big business and hoping that big business will in turn serve the people. But it's obvious that's not happening. We saw this with Trump's tax cuts to the super rich, cuts which every economist worth their salt said was going to cost the average American money. But how did the financial markets react? They not only went up, but they skyrocketed. The exact same thing happened when the Trudeau government announced its own tax cuts to big business. Things are actively getting worse and harder for the average persons in our society, and the markets do not care about it at all, and in fact are happy about it. Really, I guess this shouldn't come as a surprise. I mean, in the aftermath of every single collapse and crash of the last 100 years, big business has made money no matter what. Champagne corks always pop when a crash happens, and even when corporations suffer under a crash, those who pay for it are almost always the workers. When the Trudeau government announced their new tax cuts, they said that it was to help modernize and cut costs. Well, you know what the biggest cost a business has? Labor costs, paying employees, giving them benefits. When companies and governments talk about keeping costs low, it means cutting wages, cutting jobs, cutting benefits, moving jobs overseas. When they talk about modernizing, it means automating. It means getting rid of human workers, and every single time, the one who loses is the average person. Many would say that the system has never supported the average person. The governments of the world are giving billions and billions of dollars to corporations to create jobs, but these corporations just take the money and cut jobs anyway, so that shareholders make double the money, just like GM and just like Bombardier. These corporations are looking at the governments of the world as just another source of income, as if getting our money from their products and services aren't enough, but they're now going after our tax dollars too. Meanwhile, they face lower tax rates than pretty much anyone else in our entire country, and what do with all those billions of dollars from the government? They squirrel them away in tax havens, so we'll never see a single cent of any of it back in tax. These corporations are leeches. They are parasites, sucking tax dollars out of countries from all across the world to enrich themselves at our expense and only making things harder on all of us. The only bad welfare in this world is corporate welfare, and there is a whole lot of corporate welfare going on right now. But oh, great entitled snowflake, you may be asking, this whole thing sounds massively unsustainable. Do they think that they can just continue getting away with this? Aren't they worried that all of this will eventually collapse and they'll be destroyed along with it? Well, there's a number of things I can say in response to that. Number one is that many companies probably just aren't thinking that far ahead. Capitalism doesn't like thinking about the future. The future costs money and takes attention away from making money now. And of course, there's the fact that many people in our society are still so wrapped up in the lies and delusions of capitalism that they could easily just be telling themselves that this time it will be different, that this time things will just keep going forever. And of course, there's the fact as well that they profit off of the degradation of workers, that the more desperate workers are, the more likely they are to allow themselves to be exploited. All of those are perfectly plausible possibilities. They're possibilities which are not good for the average person, but they're possibilities. But personally, yeah, I would say that especially big companies know exactly where this is headed, and honestly, they probably don't care. The banks knew where their subprime mortgages were going to eventually head, but they just didn't care because they knew that they'd probably make money anyway and that the government would probably bail them out, which is exactly what they did because the banks threatened that thousands of people would lose their jobs and savings if they had to close. If you're really interested in seeing where these companies believe all of this is headed, I can't encourage you enough to read and listen to the article entitled Survival of the Richest, The Wealthy Are Plotting to Leave Us Behind by Douglas Rushkoff, media theorist and writer. Spoiler alert, but in the article, Rushkoff talks about how he was invited to talk to 5 men from the upper echelons of the hedge fund world about future technology. You know, the conversation starting off with things like, what is quantum computing? What is Bitcoin and how can blockchain help business? and eventually moving on to which region will be less impacted by the coming climate crisis, Alaska or New Zealand? Which place is better to invest our money in? Is Google really building Ray Kurzweil a home for his brain, and will he actually be able to survive the transition from organic to inorganic? And finally, they eventually got to the question that all 5 of them were thinking: how can I maintain authority over my private security force after the event? What is the event, you might be asking? Well, Rushkoff says that the event is just their euphemism for a global collapse caused by climate change, social unrest, unstoppable disease, whatever eventually causes society to collapse. Because these guys know that after the event, all of their money is going to be worthless. So they want to know a way that they can keep control over their private security forces who will be guarding their compounds and underground bunkers and make sure that they don't revolt and, put their heads on pikes and stuff. They then spent the next hour discussing their ideas for possible means of control. Special combination locks on all of the food, which only they have the combinations to, electronic shock collars, maybe even foregoing humans altogether and using robots if the technology comes around in time. And people scoff when it's suggested that science, tech, and business majors be required to take some humanities courses during their degree. I highly encourage you to read the rest of Rushkoff's work. The man is truly onto something, if maybe a little overly focused on Gnostic philosophy. But hell, who isn't? These companies know exactly what they're going to be doing when their schemes finally collapse. They are already planning on surviving, and this isn't something new either. Why do you think Elon Musk is so focused on colonizing Mars? I think it was only a few years ago too, where the CEO of PayPal or something was talking about how he and other rich people of the world would eventually build autonomous nations out in the middle of the ocean where they didn't have to be restricted by national laws. I actually have a futurist book centered around that, and spoiler alert, it doesn't go well for the people who live on the islands with them. The wealthiest business owners and CEOs on our planet are probably already planning what they're going to do when the end of the world comes, and the worst part of that is that they have absolutely no interest whatsoever in stopping it. Rushkoff, when asked the question of what to do with their private security forces, gives them the answer of, hey, if you want to control your private security forces, maybe treat them well. Maybe try to actually use your money to improve their lives. And hey, while you're at it, maybe work to try and stop the event from happening in the first place. And you know how these 5 men responded? They basically laughed at him. The wealthiest corporations of the world aren't going to stop the world from collapsing because they have absolutely no interest in doing so. They will happily drive the world off the cliff and let everyone else on Earth suffer because they know that they'll be fine. They are already planning what they're going to do once their current mode of doing business becomes unsustainable, and they're going to make sure that they remain on top. In fact, Rushkoff says that the fact that their schemes will eventually destroy the planet is actually kind of the point. They believe that they have the right to abuse and exploit the Earth for all it's worth, that the Earth is just a bundle of resources and that they have the right to exploit it because they're so rich and so in control, and that when the Earth is finally out of things for them to exploit, they'll just move on to the next world and do it all over again. That mankind will kind of transcend the Earth, that we will devour it as part of our evolution and move on to consuming more and more. I know that other people probably have figured all of this stuff out already, but this is really the year that it all finally clicked together for me. And perhaps the worst part of all of this is that we are currently on the precipice of just such a disaster that's coming right for us. I'm sure most people have heard about the IPCC report on climate change that was released this year, but for those who aren't aware, basically, the UN organization, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which reviews and assesses hundreds of different scientific studies and research, and is the internationally accepted authority on climate change, released a report which said that they think we only have until 2030 to cut emissions in half, so as to avoid the worst effects of climate change and otherwise stop millions of people from becoming climate refugees, stop the oceans from becoming completely sterile and lifeless, and stop hurricanes from basically literally shredding the Earth apart. Now, obviously, this is really grim news. No one needs me to explain that to them. I know that the night after the report came out, I definitely had one of my darkest nights in a long, long time. I probably couldn't sleep until like 7 a.m., and I was just feeling like everything was doomed. I think a lot of people right now feel hopeless too, that they feel like, well, what can we do now? Does this mean that the world is doomed? What's the point then? Obviously, it's hopeless, right? Well, no. It's not hopeless. I think that if there's ever a generation that can bring the entire world together, it's our generation. But there is a way better, way faster, and way easier way to stop climate change. It's simple. It's time to end capitalism. Or at least, it's time to kick these big fossil fuel companies in the ass, as we should have done all this time. It's time to stop with the whole, oh, if everyone does a little bit here and there, everything will be fine. We've been trying that for like 30 years. It's not done anything. No, it's time for direct anti-capitalist action. Every time any one of you gets discouraged and thinks that's all hopeless, I want you to repeat this phrase. just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. And spoiler alert, most of them are fossil fuel companies. And really, just think about that. Just 100 companies and the fuel that they are directly responsible for are creating almost 3/4 of all global emissions. How unfair is that? Just 100 companies are literally killing the world pretty much unopposed and enriching themselves off of all of it, while everyone else is left with an uninhabitable world. But imagine how far along we could be if those companies just weren't there anymore. If, something terrible were to happen to those companies, just imagine. That's 71% of all global emissions gone. We'd basically be in the clear for the 2030 deadline and would be a good ways towards our 2050 deadline too. Now, I'm not saying that something terrible should happen to those companies, wink wink, but I definitely not mourn them if something absolutely terrible were just somehow to happen to them. Basically, we can destroy capitalism and save the world at the same time. Seriously, just 100 companies, that's it. That's really all that's standing between us and having a healthy, happy Earth. How hard will it really be to deal with 100 companies over 10 years? Personally, I think that at least sounds a hell of a lot more doable to me than stopping everyone from eating meat or whatever we all need to do our part bullshit oil company propaganda has been pushing. So always remember, just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of all global emissions. And keep your focus directly on those companies. Remember that they're what stand between us and a sustainable future, not each other. Because not only are those companies not interested in stopping climate change at all, but they're already planning on what they're going to do once the world comes to an end. All of them probably already have a bunker being built right now. And these companies have the real means and ability to make real change in this world too, but they've repeatedly chosen not to. ExxonMobil's scientists figured out climate change was going on in the 1980s, but did they tell the world about it and maybe try to stop it? No. You know what they did? They raised the level of their drilling platforms to accommodate rising sea levels and started mapping out their plan to drill for oil in the Arctic once all the ice had melted. And don't count on people like Elon Musk to save us either. So, that begs the question, what is our next step? How do we stop these 100 companies from destroying the world and profiting off of it the entire time? Well, I'm sure the tabbies in the audience will be raising their baseball bats and saying, smash? And you know what? Yeah. If you want to smash capitalism and start your revolution, go ahead and do it. Start building the guillotine, grab your pitchforks and your copies of Das Kapital, start marching down Main Street, hoard all the bread, I don't know, do what you have to start the revolution. What? What is it? Oh, don't you start hissing at me. Don't you dare start telling me that you're all still clinging to what it says in that bloody book. I don't care if Marx says that we have to wait until capitalism fails before the revolution can start. Have you not read the IPCC report? We probably don't have time for capitalism to fail because our Earth will probably fail first. Oh, don't worry. I have a lot to say about leftist discourse around revolution in the new year, but it all basically boils down to fuck Marx. I don't care what he has to say. We don't have time for any of that. The idea that revolution just eventually becomes inevitable and only happens when there's no other option is completely and utterly bullshit. If you're just going to sit around and wait for the revolution to happen, you're going to be waiting forever because revolution is never inevitable. You only think it's inevitable when you're looking back on history with hindsight. Hindsight may be 20/20, but it also has a tendency to flatten history. We look back at the past and think that it must have been inevitable, but we don't have the other side of that story. What history would have been like if revolution hadn't started. We only think that it's inevitable because it's the past, because we're able to look back on it. I'm sure in the future, if there is one, people will look back at our revolution, if there ever is one, and say that it was inevitable too. But it's not inevitable because those revolutions aren't just words on the page of a history textbook. They were real events which really happened, caused and started by real people who were probably in the same position we are now, feeling trapped in a system that they were told was just the way things are and that, yeah, it's not perfect, but it's the best things are ever going to get. So why even bother trying to make things better? Revolution is not carved out of stone before it even happened. It's a fire which catches and spreads until it's impossible to ignore any longer, and that fire always starts with one singular spark, one singular act. For the French Revolution, it was women storming Versailles, demanding to have bread to feed their families. Though let's be frank that the French Revolution maybe isn't the best model for a revolution. The Arab Spring started in Tunisia with just a few protests against the injustice within their society, though again, maybe not the way we want our revolution to go. Every single revolution starts with a single spark. Be that spark. Protest, riot, be civilly disobedient or uncivilly disobedient. I don't care. If there's ever a time for the revolution to happen, now is the time. Every single revolutionary in history has been where we are right now, thinking about all the problems in their society and wondering just how much they're expected to endure before people get fed up with it. If you want the revolution to happen, I'm most certainly not going to stop you. Hell, after the IPCC report, building a guillotine sounds pretty good to me. But if you want to go out and smash capitalism, you need to go and do it. It's time to put down the white, cisgendered male philosophers who have been dead for 100 years, and time to actually show the world whether you're just LARPing as a revolutionary or not. And for those who don't want to lead all of the CEOs to the guillotine, it's time for all of us to get organized. Again, it's time to be civilly disobedient, it's time to protest, and it's time to demand more action. It's time to force government to finally start listening to us again, because not only is them constantly choosing companies over us, wasting taxpayer dollars, making everything harder and basically a cliche at this point, but it's also undemocratic. 60% of Americans back tuition-free college. 60% of Americans want socialized healthcare. 66% want stricter gun laws. 60% of Canadians want the government to do more to fight climate change. 46% of Canadians think carbon pricing is a good idea, with another 33% thinking that it's acceptable. And even Alberta, where free market capitalism goes to die and where most of Canada's oil is produced, more than 60% of people think that government should be less reliant on fossil fuels. So why aren't they? Seriously, why not? A majority of the population wants this to happen, so why is it not happening already? Aren't we supposed to be a democracy after all? If the majority of the population wants something, that's what happens. That's how democracy works. So why doesn't it? It's because corporate money has hijacked and corrupted our democracy. Because government is convinced that corporations will do their job for them and create prosperity. But those corporations are only interested in enriching themselves and their shareholders. So it's time for direct action. It's time to protest. It's time to strike. It's time to call your representatives and demand answers from them. It's time to hound those who refuse to do anything. It's time to be as loud and as vocal as possible. And it's time to demand that big money get the hell out of our government once and for all. It's time to stop accepting tax cuts for the rich and cuts to benefits for everyone else. It's time that government invest where it will see the most benefits for everyone, in its citizens, in us. Because the better off our fellow citizens are, the better everyone else is. Whereas the better a corporation does, the more money their shareholders make and the more money we'll never see again. It's time to demand that government invest in solutions to climate change, because yes, while climate change is a bundle of so many problems, there are just as many, if not more, solutions to those problems. There's algal fuels, which can be used to replace fossil fuels. There's nuclear energy, which can be clean, and with modern technology can even be renewable. There's a professor at the University of Calgary who has created a method that takes carbon dioxide and methane gas and in under a minute can transform them into carbon fiber. Imagine the potential of that technology if it could be scaled up. We could attach that onto the side of any steelworks, power plant, refinery, or whatever is producing greenhouse gases and turn it into a zero-emitting business and produce cheap carbon fiber on top of that, which could be sold to make things like cars, boats, even reinforced plywood for houses. We could enter into the carbon fiber age with that technology. Imagine carbon fiber reinforced houses that won't blow over in a hurricane or a tornado or fall down in an earthquake. There's a theory going around that the next generation of thorium reactors could actually suck carbon out of the air as they operate. We could produce clean energy and decarbonize the atmosphere at the same time. There's technology to fight the negative effects of climate change. We can reseed coral reefs, or we can use unused ships and planes to build artificial reefs. We can replant forests and greenify our cities. We can artificially create and maintain habitats in the wild for endangered animals, and that's not even a fraction of the solutions out there. They are there. Green technology is ready to be implemented. Those in the industry have been saying that for years. All they need is the investment and the political will to do so. Push for it, fight for it, shout for it, demand nothing less than the salvation of our Earth. And of course, we need to get rid of these 100 companies and the emissions they're responsible for. People are already suggesting that we legislate that these companies have to pay for the cost of climate change and the transition away from oil and gas. And that sure as hell sounds like a good start at the very least, because trust me, these companies have the money to do it. Personally, I'd like to see us go further. I say that we seize their assets as payment for all the destruction that they've caused and have their companies slowly dismantled as the world works to transition away from oil and gas to green energy and nuclear. No company should be big enough to destroy the world, but that's exactly what these companies are doing. They've turned the world into nothing more than a machine to make them money. That needs to stop, and honestly, I really don't care how at this point. If it's peaceful and companies can be convinced to transition over to renewables of their own free will, then fine. I'd prefer if the governments of the world stepped in and did it themselves, but I'll take it. And if it's by angry mobs dragging the execs out of their offices by force, then I'm most definitely not going to stop them. And while people may say, what would the world economy be without oil and gas? I say that what brings prosperity is us. We are the ones who bring prosperity to the world with the work we do every single day and with the taxes we pay towards the common good. The tax dollars that the government then turns around and gives to these corporations in the hope that they'll bring more jobs instead of the government actually doing it themselves. We are the ones who bring prosperity. We are the ones who drive the country's economy. We don't need them, they need us. And I think it's finally time that we make the world remember that once again. If it's peaceful, that would be ideal. But hey, I'm not going to stand in front of the oil execs and the guillotine if that means we still have a future. And for fuck's sakes, vote! Look, I know some people have problems with voting. I know that voter suppression is a huge problem, especially in the States. But seriously, if you're able to vote, why aren't you? Seriously, voting rates in Canada and the US are revolting. They make me sick to my stomach, and that has to change. I don't care if you think voting really doesn't matter. I don't care if you think that voting is too hard. I don't care if you'd rather do other things. I don't care if you think that the revolution will come any day now. There are ways for you to vote ahead of time if you have to. There's loads of ways to make sure that your voice is heard. And people, especially on the left, not being involved in the process is one of the reasons why we're here right now. It's most definitely not the only reason, but it's a contributing factor. We've got work to do and we need politicians who are going to listen to us in office. So, even if you don't think voting is worth it, please vote for me, for those like me, just so that we cannot have active bigots and corporate shills in government for once. We're going to need the government on our side now more than ever. Basically, my advice to anyone who wants to know what they should do now is whatever you've been thinking of doing, do it. Now is the time for crazy, radical solutions. So, if you want to protest, protest. If you want to run for office, go run for office. If you want to start your own green tech company, go start it. If you want to plant a forest of trees, grab a shovel and start planting. If you want to drag those corrupt politicians and corporate tyrants from their offices kicking and screaming, get a group of friends together and have at it. And that's my New Year's resolution this year. I don't normally do New Year's resolutions, but this year I'm doing it. Of course, I have ones like I want to rework my query letter and start sending queries to agents and to publishers in the new year because I kind of stopped as I got the podcast up and running. But now I feel like I'm in a good enough place where I can start sending them out again and hopefully use the podcast as an added incentive. But my main New Year's resolution is that I want to go to more protests. I want to become more politically active and I want to do my part in helping the fight against climate change, even if it's a small part. There are already some plans in the works to try and make the governments of the world listen. If you're interested in joining a worldwide movement, check out earthstrike.com and consider helping out in the planned worldwide general strike that's going to be happening on the 27th of September next year. Right there is a concrete, organized effort to make the governments of the world pay attention, and it's something all of us can be a part of if we want. If you're looking for some way to help out, I'm sure Earthstrike will be more than happy to have some more help. Maybe I'll see you all there. This is a fight for our economy. This is a fight for our democracy. This is a fight for the natural world and the other organisms we share this world with, but more than anything, this is a fight for our children and their children and their children and all the future generations of human beings who are going to be born on this earth and after this earth. There's a saying that I think needs to be spray painted across the front of every building in the world, and hell, maybe I'll be one of the people to do that in the new year. That saying is, we don't inherit the world from our parents, we borrow it from our children. Our world has been borrowing a lot more from our children than it ever planned to pay back, but it's time to start paying. For the rest of history, future generations of humans will look back on us right now and talk about us. We need to ask ourselves what we want them to say. Do we want them to say that we were selfish and wasteful, that we saw the cataclysm coming but did nothing to stop it? Or do we want them to say that we fought tooth and nail to protect our world? Do we want them to say that we faced massive odds to make sure that the world was still intact for them? Do we want them to say that even if it is too late, that we at least tried? Because, in the end, even if it is already too late, so what? It's not an excuse. Future generations deserve to know that we still fought for them. that we at least tried. And even if we don't succeed, you know what? It's still not an excuse to give up. If we don't make our 10-year deadline, then we just need to keep fighting after that. We can never stop fighting. If we do miss the deadline, then we just need to reinvest more heavily in carbon capture technology. We need to save the animals we can and gather the DNA of those we can't. We need to seriously look into the possibility of geoengineering. The end is not inevitable. Nothing is inevitable in this world. The fate of our world hinges on the choices we are all making right now. So it's time we start making the right choices and go after our real enemy, the corporations who are planning on driving our world to destruction and profiting off of it the entire way. They've got their plan, and hopefully we've got ours now too. Oh, and also don't go thinking that just because climate change is probably the most important issue, that means that everything else isn't also important. We've got to uplift people here, and we need to look after each other. And if it all gets to be too much, then take a break. Watch some cat videos. Relax a little. A day or two of rest isn't going to destroy the world or anything. We're playing the long game here. We need to relax occasionally. We're all in this together. Someone will pick up the slack for a bit. And never forget, just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of all global emissions. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, people. So let's get started, shall we? Phew! Finally got this video finished. With Christmas and everything, I was starting to worry that I wasn't going to be able to get it done on time. This one was a monster to do, so thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to thumbs up, like, rate, review, whatever you can do, wherever you're listening to this. Leave a comment below if you want. I always love seeing new, lovely, wonderful, hopefully complimentary comments. Make sure to follow and or subscribe for future episodes. Follow me on Twitter, follow the show's Twitter, and if the fight against climate change isn't completely draining your wallets, please consider throwing a couple dollars into the beaten up guitar case I have laid onto the sidewalk that we in our modern day call my Patreon. Every dollar truly does help in ways I can't sum up in a single outro, and not only will help me have an income and get out to those protests I'm planning on going to this year, but will also help me build the sex dungeon of my dreams. I'm going to be taking January off to get some things done, like reworking my query letter, hopefully maybe do some things for the show. Plus, it's my birthday in January, so I'll be busy coming to terms with creeping ever further away from my youth and ever closer to the existential eldritch horror that is being gay at 30. See you all in February. Until next time, may the privilege be with you. Stay entitled, snowflakes, and Happy New Year!